Hi there, I'm Spicy Steve down at Merit Kitchens in Kerrisdale, and here I'm talking to you again about my favorite beverage, a nice cup of tea. We talked last time about some of the types of teas and areas of the world they came from. And the reason I'm covering teas is because tea comes from Asia, and China and India are the two biggest producers as far as qualities of tea. Assam, Darjeeling, and parts of China are some of the most popular areas, as well as the island of Sri Lanka. Now, making a cup of tea is something we didn't cover last time, but first just to give you a quick introduction again to some of the teas that we did talk about. We have some of the Japanese teas, such as Genmai cha, which is a wonderful nutty tea that has brown rice added to it, and some of that toasted brown rice actually pops into little mini popcorn. And the tea leaves tend to be longer, broken green tea. The tea leaves actually end up normally being a bit more bitter, but because of that nuttiness of the rice, it makes it a much more mellow tea. Lovely tea to have for a relaxing evening or in the morning. Great to serve your guests, and one that won't be too strange as far as that nutty flavor. It's very inviting. I find everyone loves that tea. Here's some classic Indian tea. This is a black tea. This is actually grown in Malaysia, but they're Indian plants because a lot of it was transplanted. In this case, this is to the Cameron Highlands of Malaysia, and they brought tea plantation workers over from India who immigrated to work there, as well as the tea plants. And this is a typical tea, a black tea, which has been picked, and then it has been basically picked by mixed size. This is a fairly broken variety here, and then it's been essentially dried and not necessarily fermented in this case, but certainly been dried and it's turned into a black tea because it starts as green. Over here is a jasmine green tea, which is a southern Chinese tea where you've had jasmine flowers added to infuse it with flavor. Another one is oolong, which is the tea is picked and rolled, if you can see, and it's fermented, as well as the drying process it goes through to give it almost a little bit of a smokiness to it, and it's a little bit more of a pick-me-up tea. So if you're going to it for dim sum and they ask you for what kind of tea would you like, you often get jasmine, which will be more relaxing, or you've got oolong, which is a darker, more robust tea that will give you a bit of a pick-me-up. Generally, the dark black teas will have more of a pick-me-up for you, whereas the green teas tend to be much more relaxing on the system. And in the middle here, I also have rooibos, which has become a popular trendy tea. And rooibos is from South Africa. It's not really a true tea. It's actually from a plant. But I include it because it's my great little discovery. I go to a South African store where I buy this loose and in bulk, and whereas you can go to tea shops and get them infused with rhubarb and vanilla. But I find this great in the evening because there's no caffeine in it, whereas other teas do. And it also is high in antioxidants. So it's a great tea that, for me, tastes with milk added like a regular cup of black tea. And you can have it in the evening, not worry about staying up all night. Now, a lot of people worry about tea has so much caffeine, but in reality, you use so little tea compared to the amount of coffee used to make a cup. So you're going to get a lot more caffeine out of coffee than you are out of tea, even though pound for pound, tea has more caffeine. How do you make a good cup of tea? Because this is one thing people don't know, and there's a lot of fallacies with it. First of all, if you're doing an English-style cup of tea with a dark tea, or should I say a black tea, what you want to do is bring your water to the boil. You want your water boiling fresh, so it's basically aerating almost through the boiling process. Pour some hot water into your pot, swill it around, and dump it out. Now, people say that's the old English tradition of warming the pot, because then at that point you throw your tea leaves in, and they're sitting for a moment just on that hot pot. But there's another reason for that. If you ever notice inside a pot, particularly those old English brown Bettys, which I have at home, you'll see a black film inside. That's the tannins in the tea that are building up in the pot. If you're ever at work and you make a cup of tea with a tea bag in a styrofoam cup, and as you drink it, you'll notice there's rings. That's the tannin. That's why you want to make a cup of tea from a pot and not in a cup, because you're going to get that going into your system, into your stomach, and it's going to give you an acidic sort of twang, which is not going to be very enjoyable. So you get a much nicer cup of tea from the pot. By putting that hot water in, you're not cleaning the tannins that are stuck onto the side. You need to do a good cleaning for that, but you're getting anything that's loose in there, any leftover loose tea leaves, and also any loose tannins out. At that point, you bring your water back to the boil, okay? You want it boiling, and you add your hot water on top of your tea. For a pot this size, I usually add about a spoon per person and an extra for the pot, as they say, but that's if it's a full pot that you're making. At that point, with a black tea, you should be letting your tea sit for maybe about 3 minutes or so it's essentially steeped. I give it a stir or two because, again, I don't use tea bags, I use loose tea. And then I use basically a strainer to pour my tea. And up front here, you see a lot of different forms of strainers that you have, as well as diving bells. These are a classical thing you see where you actually fill your tea in here, put it in, and then basically you move your bell, back and forth, and that's another way of not having to have a strainer at the end of the day. But one little tip you can do is once you made your tea, I have a second pot at home. I sometimes pour the black tea back into another pot, so I've left the tea leaves behind, because if you let your tea sit, it will get quite strong tasting. Again, that's the tannins. With a green tea, you don't have that same issue. That's why you can go into a restaurant, let's say for dim sum in a Chinese restaurant, and they'll keep adding hot water to the same pot, because the green tea leaves will last a lot longer. You'll get a lot more tea out of it, and they don't go bitter like you do with the black teas. So a little bit of a different process there. So go out and experiment a little bit and have a tea party. It's a great drink. It's a safe drink to have as well, because you're going to drink and drive. And it's certainly one that is the most popular drink in the world, one of the oldest drinks. I guess the coffee drinkers will debate on that, but it's certainly the oldest, 5,000 years old. So go out and enjoy a nice cup of tea, because that's the perfect beginning to a day, and for me also the perfect end to a day. For Shaw TV, I'm Spicy Steve at Merritt Kitchens in Vancouver. Cheers.
For recipes and information on cooking classes, visit spicysteve.com.